Thank you, everyone. Good morning. So I'm going to recognize the fact that the application network is a pretty big concept, right? And it's solving a really big problem, and it's a problem that really exists today for lots of customers, lots of companies in general. And the other aspect is that it's actually happening right now, right? We just heard from McDonald's the kind of transformation that's allowing them to go through, and we're seeing this happening right now over and over again. But you may be asking yourself, is this something that I can do? Is this something that's applicable in my industry? Is this something that will work in my company and with my teams of developers that are used to working in particular ways? How real can this become actually for me? How realistic is it for me to build an application network? So I wanted to take you through that a little bit. So let's go back to the same project that Ross had before, right? That same simple project, and look at the traditional approach again, right? So they're trying to build a web page, a web application, powered by customer data that sits in SAP and Salesforce, with order data that sits inside of an e-commerce system. And so the traditional approach is, look at where your data is coming from, look at what you need to produce, and create an integration project. And in that integration project, what would you normally do? You'd pull in the data from SAP and Salesforce, combine it together to have your customer data inside that integration project. And then you'd pull the data in from the e-commerce system, the order status, combine it with the customer data, and now you've got your order status data. And similarly, you've got your order history data. And now that you've solved those problems inside your integration project, you can pump that data out to your web application or your API if you're using a single-page application, and you'd be done, right? And as Ross was saying, that has all these advantages of on time, within budget, fully funded, it meets requirements, but for the organization as a whole, it has a lot of challenges. It has no reuse. It has tight coupling between the apps, and it doesn't really have any governance built in. And the way to see this is to think, what happens 6 months later, right? So you've got another project that just bubbled up. Now they want you to do the same thing in a mobile application. But that team that built it before is now long gone. They're gone off to do something else. That project is finished. So what are they going to do? They're just going to do it again. And that's the typical dynamic that we see. Every project is just as hard as the previous one, and you don't ever get out of this increasing load. You're always behind. Is there another way to do this? And we believe the answer is yes, and we call this API-led connectivity. But what I want to talk about today is it's actually very natural for developers to do this if you just put the right tools right in front of them. Let's look at exactly that same project, right? I kept the boxes in there so you can see where the previous one fit. And what were they doing? They started by pulling in data from SAP and Salesforce to produce a customer data feed. Here's your SAP data, here's your Salesforce data, and this is the combined feed. And instead of just keeping that inside of your integration project, make it easy for them at that point to publish it as an API, even if it's internal, right? It was natural for them to do it, and this allows them to unit test against that particular piece of the project. Make it natural and easy to expose that as an API. That is the key observation. And similarly with the order data, expose that as an API. And these exposing of data kind of APIs is something we call system APIs, right? These are the systems that you will be interacting with, but everything has got an API on top of it. And that's the critical piece. That's what allows that application network to form. Everything gets an API on top of it. And it's natural for those developers, because the next thing that they do is they'll build the order status and the order history services. And again, it's very natural to expose those as APIs, things that you can actually test right there and then. We call these things process APIs. And those are the things that allow you to centralize your processes, or decentralize them if that's what you're trying to do, and define them in some well-defined way that you can reuse them. And once you've got your processes defined as process APIs, you'll pull that information up, just like you did before, and call that an experience API, because that API is optimized for that particular experience. It may not be reused by other types of experiences, but 6 months later, what happens? When that mobile application comes in, do you have to reinvent and rediscover how to talk to SAP or Salesforce? Do you have to reinvent your processes? No, you can actually just tap in from that mobile API into those published process APIs. Much easier. Developers love to do things that are easy, right? They'd much rather not redo everything else. So this is natural for developers to actually go do if you just make it a little easy for them to see that it's possible to get this kind of reuse. And what are they going to do with that extra time? All right, some of them might just go home and go to sleep. I sometimes feel that way. But in fact, what you're looking for is to say, you know what? I bet I can enhance that application. I bet I can actually add a little bit of extra information. Maybe I pull in a couple of our shipping vendors, tie them together. I already know how to do this kind of thing, and create a shipments API. And now that I've got a shipments API, I can create processes around tracking shipment status and plug those into my mobile API. And now you've got your developers investing in innovation instead of in recreating the wheel. And that is the turn of the corner. At that point, you've got the recipe for building an application network. And that's what we call API-led connectivity. So this API-led connectivity approach makes you stop thinking in terms of these boxes, these one-off kinds of projects, and makes you think in terms of reusable building blocks. These little blocks that everybody contributes to and that add up overall to the much faster agility and speed of your organization. Now, if you look at these, you notice that in terms of each project, it's just as much on time or even faster. It's still within budget. It still meets the requirements. But when you look at the problems we had before, reuse is now manifest. It's built in, right? And people have gotten used to this reuse. Right? They've got a little bit addicted to it. And the tight coupling we saw before has now become the kind of loose coupling that you want. It's coupled just through the APIs, through these well-defined contracts between the services. So it's just the right level of coupling. And how about the governance? Well, there's a perfect place to attach the governance, which is at the API level, at the individual service level, because each service and API define their domain. And the Anypoint platform is there to make sure that this actually happens. So the way that it works, and the way that it builds in governance into every one of these services is as follows. Let's look at that Anypoint platform in pieces. And we're going to hear a lot more about that over the next few days. But at a high level, it starts with that runtime engine, with that single-purpose runtime engine that allows you to do everything you need from integration to APIs to proxying and all the stuff you need between with a single runtime engine. So you don't have to think in advance, is this going to be an API? Is this going to be an integration? You shouldn't have to think about that. And it can talk to anything. So even things that don't have nice APIs, it can still talk to them and create good APIs for those so that they can participate in this ecosystem of reusable building blocks. We've leaned a lot into design, and you'll see us continue to invest into the design aspect to make sure that it's easy for people to define what is the outline of that building block. What are those APIs going to do? What purpose are they serving? And then go ahead and implement that behind the scenes and operate it very efficiently. So once you know exactly what it is you're trying to do, everything else gets out of your way, and you start to feel that efficiency happening. And we lean into that efficiency and that good design through a very rich engagement layer that touches every aspect of this, where you can see what's already out there, where it's easy for you to publish and contribute to the stuff that's out there, and where you can start to get a little bit of user-generated content and virality happening as the marketplace, if you like, of these reusable building blocks builds up. All of this is sitting on top of a set of runtime services that abstract away all those details of implementation that you shouldn't have to worry about as a developer. As a developer, you should be able to just think about what logic are you trying to actually build in. What's the actual functionality you're going for? And you should be able to run it, the same application, wherever it is. In the cloud, on-premise, in a hybrid situation, in multiple situations, same application needs to run the same way everywhere. And that's really what the Anypoint platform is about. And again, we'll spend a lot of time during CUNECT talking about those pieces. The high-level point is, it's really good for developers. It's actually designed for developers to lean into that natural motion that they do and let them become better and better at that. But at the same time, it's also really good for the operational and information security people because the governance is built right in. We call that carrot-based governance. It's not something that's imposed from the top. It's something that's built into this fabric. And it's something that keeps on giving. So if you look at the places where you're now going to start investing with this extra bandwidth, right? You might create a set of microservices, right? There might be some part of your organization that's particularly agile and fast, and they create these microservices, but they'll need to interact and participate in the same ecosystem with everything else. And by putting APIs on top of them, you can actually blend them together with your existing applications, with your existing systems, leverage all the investment that you've already made in all of these systems, weave that in as a natural participant in this set of building blocks. Expose it, for example, to a set of partners. Right? It doesn't really matter what the underlying technology is because you've exposed it as these APIs. Or let's say you've got a legacy system. I would guess that a lot of people in this audience have a lot of legacy systems back there, maybe a big ERP system, right? Can that actually participate in this? Absolutely, through APIs, right? Define the services that you're getting out of that ERP legacy system, right? What are the system APIs at that level, and what would you like to do at the process level with all of those? Some of your processes will continue to live inside the ERP, but the ones you want to expose, go ahead and put process APIs on top of them, and put them together with all the other assets that you have to create whatever experiences actually make sense. And then over time, you can decide, you know, I can actually implement some of those processes or some of those systems differently. I can go and swap out some piece of that ERP system. And over time, you might become a lot more agile down at the implementation level without destabilizing anything on top of it, right? Because just the right abstractions have been laid into place. And that's the idea of API-led connectivity. This just continues to happen. It becomes just the default way that your organization starts to work. And these are really those building blocks that we were talking about before, right? Everybody's contributing building blocks, everybody's plugging into the application network, and everybody's getting the value from other people who have participated in that application network. And so your application network emerges out of this piece by piece, not top-down, not in some kind of predictated fashion, but as the needs evolve, more and more building blocks are added, more and more of them get reused. And you know, some of them may not last the test of time, but that's fine, because over time, you'll swap out some pieces. You'll add some pieces. Some pieces won't make sense, and they'll wither and die, and you'll swap them with something else. But it's actually built for change, right? This application network, first of all, is your application network, right? It's the one that you're actually running your business on. And it's the one that is dictated by your needs right now. And as your needs change, your application network will evolve. But it's actually built for change, right? And that's really the crux of it, right? You've designed the changeability right in. Now I'd like to actually move to building out an application network for you right here on the stage. And we needed to actually choose some particular industry that's going to go through transformation. And it's actually pretty easy. Like, I can't name an industry that isn't ripe or undergoing transformation right now. But I wanted to choose one that was actually very personal and something that a lot of us in the room are probably resonating with. So the one that I chose is the health insurance and healthcare today, that industry, right? And very often this industry is pitting the, for example, insurance providers against their own customers, against patients and families and so on. And so what happens in this industry is that there's a tremendous amount of technology already there. Most hospitals are already using electronic medical record systems of one sort or another. A lot of stuff is digitized. The issue is not that the data isn't there. The issue is that it's not connected in some reasonable way, and it doesn't evolve very fast at all. And the end result of that is that the patient themselves gets a very disjointed experience, right? If you go in there and they ask you all these questions, like, shouldn't you already know these answers? That's because their systems don't talk to each other. And if you think about what happens for the doctor and the nurse, it's not any better, right? Take your doctor aside and say, what do you think of that new EMR system that got put in, right? And you're going to get a bunch of words you never heard from your doctor before. It's pretty interesting. It's not a great experience for them either, right? And it's not necessarily the fault of the EMR system. It's just that it's dedicated for one particular purpose, which may not be the most pleasant and enjoyable thing for everybody who's using it. And for the family, I can tell you from personal experience, you end up doing your own integration, right? I remember my dad walking around with folders and folders of medical results for my mom as, you know, her conditions kind of progressed over time. And I'm thinking to myself, why does he need to do this? It's because there isn't any other trustworthy way to get that done. And there's certainly very much friction when you try to evolve that system and take into account new technologies. So that's what we're going to try to solve for you right here. And if we can actually switch over to my laptop, we're going to try to actually build this and see if the demo gods will cooperate today. All right. So here's my development laptop. And let's get this going. And just like you, right, we will end up implementing an application network piece by piece, not top-down. So what's the very first piece that we want to solve, right? It's probably, how do I take that information that's sitting in the EMR system and plug it into a very simple application network plug in a collaboration platform, and make it a lot easier for the patient and the doctor and the other caregivers to interact. And we've chosen Salesforce Health Cloud as that second system. And so we've plugged together these two systems into a very simple beginning application network. And we've built the integration between them. Unfortunately, a lot of this already exists on Anypoint Exchange, so you can just pick it right out there. And a lot of these systems are using a standard called FHIR, F-H-I-R. And that standard allows you to have predefined templates that you can plug in and do that kind of transformation. And so let's see what the result is. I'm going to actually run this, and unfortunately it's logged me out. Let that be the last thing that happens here. All right, so now that I'm logged back in, I should be able to actually see the details for me. We're not going to put a lot of data in here, but we are going to put data that's actually relevant. So right now there's very little data, and then I'm actually going to go ahead and invoke the process that pulls in the data from the EMR system into Salesforce Health Cloud. And what you'll see down here, if everything is working, is you'll see the data start to stream in. So I'm going to refresh this part, which is basically a little visualizer. It shows us what's going on. And I'm going to refresh my screen here, and you start to see the payloads go back between the systems, right? So this is a visualizer of data that's going from one system, making an API call to another system, and eventually getting the data in just the right places. Everything exposed as APIs, which means I can actually monitor it. I have full visibility into the thing. Okay, and then if I refresh here, what I should see is a little bit of information coming in here. I think you'll see at least my address having been updated in Salesforce Health Cloud, which is a beginning. And you can imagine that exactly the same kind of thing on the address part. Now we can actually populate it through FHIR with a lot of very rich capabilities. Great. So now I've got the beginning of an application network, but that's not enough, right? Because if you're like me, when you go to the doctor is sitting there saying, great, so let's see, are you up on your immunization history? And I'm looking at him. I literally did this to one medical recently. I said, don't you already know? Like, you know, all those things were done at other medical facilities. They have their own EMR systems. Just go ask them. But these systems don't talk to each other. So let's go solve that, right? So the next piece is we're going to plug in another EMR system. Problem is that they don't necessarily all use FHIR. So this one in particular is still using the HL7 standard, but it's exposing that as XML. Mule to the rescue. So we have exactly the transformations that allow you to map from this pretty complicated XML to the FHIR JSON standard. And it ends up looking like this kind of information, like this kind of data payload. And so if we kick that off, we should see even more information getting populated into my Salesforce. Now again, I'll have to log in for a second. And now that I'm in here, and I go over and look at the console, I can fire off this other piece of the puzzle. And here we go. And now that data is flowing back and forth. It actually got transformed from one standard into another. And once it became that same standard, I could just reuse all the pieces that I had before, but because I already had a way to take FHIR data and feed it into Salesforce Health Cloud, right? And so I can start to see that acceleration mounting. And indeed, if I look over here, I should start to see a little bit more information around my care plan. Not sure if this is really my personal information, but it should be actually information that's relevant here. So here's a few medications and other kind of things that that I should be taking. And now you can see that in one place in Salesforce Health Cloud, you can actually see all the information starting to accumulate around that patient. Great. And then my doctor turns to me and he says, so are you getting a lot of exercise recently? And I'm like, what's this? This knows how much exercise I'm getting. It's in the cloud. Why don't you pull that in? Is that really that hard to do? Well, the typical way that these systems work is they've got APIs on top of them already. You can already access them. You do need to do a little bit of permissions here because I didn't necessarily give permissions in advance for Fitbit to talk to my EMR, but that's another problem that Mule can solve. And there's a RAML API for that API. There's a spec. And so again, we can build a very simple integration, and in fact, it's already productized and templatized and sitting inside of AnyPoint Exchange for how to pull that fitness information so my doctor can actually look at my exercise, and we can spend our time talking about how to get me to exercise instead of whether I do or not. So logging in one more time, let's actually go see this. Now I actually have to do something else here, which is to actually get that authorization happening. So the first thing I do is I'm actually going to go log in with Fitbit, and I get a little token. And with that token, I'm going to be able to actually run this flow again. And so going back here, I'm going to go ahead and pull that fitness data in and see that actually running. Pretty simple. Grab the data from Fitbit, transform it to FHIR standard. FHIR standard already has all the places for that exercise data. Feed it into Salesforce and have one view of that patient at the very end of this thing. And so if we go over here, you can basically pull in exactly that same kind of information that you got out of Fitbit and show exactly how little or how much in exercise I'm actually getting. So that's great. Now we've pulled in that kind of information, and that's because I carry this thing around with me. But there's other people who would be even more deeply affected if they have this kind of technology. So my father-in-law had a stroke about a year ago. And in his process of recovery, you really need to know how much sleep he's getting and how much exercise he's getting, and is he actually moving around. And my wife, right, is constantly saying, how is my dad doing? Right? She wants to keep up, and there should be a way to make that easy for her. So that same capability that we had before can pull in all sorts of other information like sleep data and exercise data and other things. This is constantly measuring my heart rate, and really keep very close tabs on him so that she can at any time say, how's my dad doing? But there's other pieces of information that are really important about him, and there's also actions that we can take. So the next step in this thing, we're going to go ahead and plug in an electronic pill bottle. You say, why do I need an electronic pill bottle? Can't you just open the bottle yourself? It's not about opening the bottle. It's knowing whether the bottle actually was open and when it should open, right? So one of the reasons that led actually to his stroke was because he was forgetting to take his medicine, right? But I've got with me here the solution to this thing. So there's a company, in fact, there are several companies that make electronic pill bottles that measure exactly what's going on in terms of medicine and can feed that data back to the rest of your application network. So that's what we've got here. Here's an electronic pill bottle. I've taken the liberty of relabeling it just slightly. For what we're prescribing for you. And this pill bottle is glowing in blue. It's glowing in blue because it's time for me to take my medications, and it does it on a schedule that you can set through an API. And when I open this thing, it actually flashes. And what that's actually saying is it's using its SIM card, its built-in SIM card, to talk through the wireless network back to an API provider that's measuring exactly when the doses were actually taken into account. And this is what the data ends up looking like, right? It's very simple JSON data telling you exactly what happened. But this data accumulates over time, right? This data over time builds up a record of exactly what medication was taken when and whether he's forgetting to take it and so on. And so the end result, and again, I'm going to have to log in once here. The end result of this thing is that in one place you can actually start to build up a very complete picture of what that patient has actually been responding to in terms of dosing, in terms of the medications. As you get older, you tend to take lots and lots of medications like that. So here's my father-in-law, Joel, and really the summary of exactly how much dosing he's been getting. So that's pretty cool. Turns out that it's actually pretty useful to have a lot of other measurements about him, not just sleep and so on, but, for example, regular measurements of his heart rate, regular measurements of his heart's activity, looking for things like atrial fibrillation. Does he have to go to the doctor every time he needs to do that? Well, with lots of advances recently, the answer is no. So there's another company that's just down the block here that actually gives you a little cardiologist in your palm. And it looks like this. I'm going to go ahead and grab our camera from the other screen and bring that in. And I'm going to plug in this capability into the application network. So here's the camera, and here's the application. It's something that actually runs on your phone. And it comes with this handy-dandy couple of sensor pads on the back You can actually take your own ECG whenever you feel like it. And they've even monetized getting the results back, right? So 19 bucks, you can get a doctor to look at this thing 3 times a day if you're that paranoid. So let me see if this actually works. The problem is that it actually measures how nervous I am here up on the stage, so we'll see. Okay. Now what's happening when I'm touching this thing, and we'll see if it'll actually respond. What's happening when I'm touching this thing is that it's actually making an electrical circuit between the 2 hands, and we'll try to measure the electrical activity between them. Now, sometimes it takes a little while, and so you can see that a lot of these technologies are still very much evolving, but these are actually FDA approved. Here we go. All right, so you see that the app is basically learning, and it's starting to filter out the noise. In this case, it's going to restart. So it's starting to filter out the noise. The electrical activity is pretty erratic in general. I mean, that's how it's supposed to be. But there's enough processing power on this little device that it can actually start to correct for that. And once it's able to actually establish a normal kind of pattern, then it starts to look for the irregularities, right? And atrial fibrillation is something you start to see in the electrical activity when it happens just before that big pulse, right? So it's not something that necessarily our eyes would pick up, but there's pattern recognition built into your phone that can make an initial diagnosis, right? Which in many cases is just what you need if you actually need to go to the doctor. Okay, now it's saying I'm extremely nervous. It's outside the current categories. So I'm obviously reacting here. But what's really cool is that all this data is available on the cloud as well. And so you can basically replay it, and the doctor can actually look at this thing and say, oh, that's pretty interesting, right? I see something going on here. You might want to come in, or more likely, you're okay, you're just on stage, we can just move on. This is more typical. Great, so now I've got a lot of information about my father-in-law, and you know, my wife is a lot happier. Turns out that he doesn't really like dealing with all these electronic gadgets. So what are you going to do, right? How is he going to benefit from all of this? Bots to the rescue. So it turns out there's an increasing amount of investment in artificial intelligence and voice recognition that allows you to start talking to your devices in much more natural ways. And that's absolutely perfect for taking care of people who are not necessarily comfortable with electronic devices. So let's plug in a few of these pieces into our application network as well. And we can reuse everything that we had before, but now we're going to do a few other things. So we're going to plug in a microphone application to try to get some sound in there. And then we're going to plug in an API called wit.ai. It's part of Facebook, and it actually allows you to send it the raw voice signal, and it does 2 things. First, it recognizes the words, but second, it also recognizes the intent. What are you actually trying to say? And that's exactly what we need, because we need to figure out whether he's feeling pretty comfortable and happy or whether he's pretty uncomfortable, right? This is my father-in-law. So how is this actually going to work? Let's go try it out. Okay, so here's the speech application. And this speech application is constantly measuring my sound. And let's actually try to talk to it and see what WIT does on the other side. Okay, so I'm going to turn this part on. And let's see if it recognizes.
How are you, Joel? Would you like anything?
So one thing that he might say if he's feeling pretty good, play me some Mozart. Amazing. Okay. So this can keep him going for hours, and it's great. But when he's not feeling so good, right, he might say something like, let's try it again.
How are you, Joel? Would you like anything?
He might say, I'm not feeling that good. Can you please call my daughter? And now it has all the information necessary to send out text messages through Twilio. And what do we have? Do we have anybody in the audience who's playing my daughter today?
We do. I just received a text message that said, please call your father.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rama. All right. So now we've got him able to interact with everything that's going on. Right? Now, that's great, right? That actually completes the picture for him in terms of an application network. But he's sitting in a place where he can do all of this, right? He's actually in a nursing home, and he can interact like that. it's pretty important for that, all that knowledge, all that capability to follow you wherever you happen to be, because sometimes things happen to you when you least expect it. And so for the last part of this demo, so far things have been good, the last part of this demo is we're going to actually take that whole cloud of information, the whole application network of health data, and make it follow people wherever it is they actually happen to be. And one of the places something might be happening to you is, let's say you're out jogging and something actually happens, right? You fall, you have some condition that gets triggered off. What happens when that happens? And it turns out there's now applications available out there that can detect the fall through the fact that you've got an accelerometer inside of your iPhone and can actually react to this thing and alert people and send text messages and really get this whole system together. But that's not enough for us, right? That's easy to plug into an application network, but you need to be able to do something about it, right? And so can we actually plug in a little bit more pieces to show you where the healthcare industry can actually go with technology that exists today? And so we're going to plug in a few other pieces. We're going to plug in a 24/7 monitoring system, right, that we're calling Guardian Angels. And we're going to have doctors standing by. In fact, I need to play a doctor here on stage for a second. So I'm going to play the doctor in this thing. And these doctors will get the alerts, but they are going to need to do something about these alerts. So they're going to need to, in some cases, dispatch medicines. And so, of course, we're going to use some drones. So we've got GPS capabilities on these drones. They can actually go to where you need to. We put APIs on top of them, plug them right into the application network. And we need to now figure out, well, what is this doctor going to do when he receives that alert? Now, doctors are pretty good, and they can process a lot of information, but why don't we help them out a little bit? Why don't we take all that information that's been accumulated in that application network, the full patient history, and exactly how much exercise he, or in this case she, is getting, and what's been happening in the last few minutes, plug that all in, send it all to an AI system that can look at this and say, you know what, it's likely to be this or this or this, and even suggest what you can do about that. Now, the doctor still makes the decision, but in the end, we can automate 80% of that. Doctor makes a decision, and we can act on that decision. That's what we're going to show you as this last part of the demo. And let's see if it all comes together. So to do that, we're going to take you all the way over to our field, if you like, that's sitting in our office, but it's a field, kind of. And we're going to go ahead and connect here one more time. And this time we're going to go to a third personality. So this time it's Aubrey, whose information is entered in here. And she's going to be running around the field when something happens. All right, so if we can cue Aubrey, let's see what happens when she's running through the field. Oh, uh-oh, she's fallen. Now, that fall application has detected that fall. It's going to give her a few seconds to recover on her own. And if it doesn't, it's going to go into action. So when you look in here, you're starting to see the signals go back and forth. All that network is pulled into place. I just got a text signal, I as the doctor, but that's not enough, right? So what it's actually going to do is it's going to call me, right? And I'm going to answer this thing. Hello? All right.
Important message for emergency contact Uri Sarid. All reported for Aubrey Morgan. Aubrey Morgan fell.
So now I can see that she fell. I can see all the information that's been collected about her. Right? I can actually see where she is. And I can see what the suggested prognosis is. And I can talk to the bystander.
Hello?
Yeah, hello, sir.
Hello? Yes, this woman's unconscious.
Yes, thanks very much for responding. We know her name is Aubrey, and she's actually a diabetic. It looks like her blood sugar level's gone down a lot, but don't worry, there's a very quick fix for this. Now, landing right next to you in a few moments will be a drone with that medication. It's programmed to go into that direction. Here it comes. And it's carrying with it a little bag of medication. Now, once the blades have stopped, go ahead and open that packet. Remove the syringe that's inside. And don't worry, there will be no blood shown here. Go ahead and give her an injection on the shoulder. She should make a quick recovery within a few seconds. And emergency help is on its way. They've already got your coordinates. This will turn out just fine. Just stay with me on the line here for a second, and hopefully this all works.
Thanks.
It's the last part of the demo that's really supposed to work, because we like Aubrey, and she should come back.
Thanks.
All right. Looks like it's working. That's awesome. All right. So that was the last leg of the application network. And it looks like we've got just the right diagnosis for her. So with that in mind, let's thank our actors and crew. And Julian, who actually built this for us, this entire thing in the last couple of weeks. Very impressive. All right, thank you.